With over 4 decades of presiding over cases in this very courtroom, you might think I've seen it all. The fake smiles of con artists, the heartless individuals pretending to cry, the egotistical characters who think they can buy their way out of trouble in court. But then one Tuesday morning in early spring, as those heavy oak doors swung open and a young woman floated in like she was on a fashion show runway in Milan, I realized that maybe I hadn't seen everything. The next 40 minutes became one of the most controversial cases to be argued in this courtroom ever, and I will be sure to add that it marked the first time in my career when the person accused of something would never be called no again. This girl's name was Alexandra Whitmore. At 24, Alexandra is the only daughter of Richard Whitmore, a billionaire business owner, the creator of the multi-million-dollar company called Whitmore Technologies. He himself boasts about a net worth that hovers just under $2.3 billion. Now, this family has quite the reputation for philanthropic activities in this city. You see the name Whitmore etched into the buildings of various hospitals, libraries, and performing arts facilities throughout the city. They sit on all important boards, attend all prestigious charity galas, and participate in the ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Whenever possible, being the Whitmore family, their last name means a lot around here, with the exception of my courtroom, where that last name never mattered. The accusations that this young woman had faced were not few. She had been charged with reckless driving, hit-and-run driving, and obstruction of justice. The truth about the events in question was captured on municipal traffic cameras. There was absolutely nothing unclear about the incident. The woman had been driving behind the minivan in the line, stopped at the red light. Having crashed into the other vehicle, Alexandra got out of her car, surveyed the damage, and laughed at the driver of the other vehicle. She referred to the damaged vehicle as a piece of junk before getting back into her own car and driving away while breaking a traffic rule, running the red light. The woman that Alexandra had run into was called Maria Chen. She is a single mom, a hospice nurse who has been taking care of patients in the final days of their lives. In the back seat of her minivan, the lady has 2 kids strapped into their safety seats, a 7-year-old girl named Emma and a 9-year-old boy called Michael. Alexandra Whitmore was at least 20 minutes late for the hearing in the morning. Not because there was a legitimate reason for delay, such as traffic or emergency. No, the young lady made the deliberate mistake to let us know that she values her time much more than mine. The defense lawyer who came rushing into my courtroom to apologize profusely had no idea of the storm he had unleashed in the courtroom behind him. Followed the young lady herself, walking gracefully into the courtroom, sunglasses still hanging on her nose, handbag dangling on her arm. She was wearing a designer dress, white silk that obviously was made specifically for her. Her dress, in a sense, says it all. It screams that this woman considers a courtroom visit just as entertaining as a fancy cocktail party. I waited for Alexandra to sit at the table of the defendant before making the first move. "Miss Whitmore," I began, "it's great to see you here today. I trust you couldn't help yourself, but stay in bed until the very last moment." Alexandra took off her sunglasses and placed them back in the little box they belonged to with exaggerated grace. "Traffic," she replied, without even bothering to look me in the eye. "No, Your Honor, not traffic, and certainly not my apologies for keeping you and your entire staff waiting this morning. Just traffic." The defense attorney quickly jumped in, trying to explain and apologize for the young lady. I thanked him and addressed Alexandra again. She was supposed to understand that this was not some fancy party where arriving fashionably late is considered polite. It was a courtroom where punctuality means a lot, but she ignored my words, shrugged casually like it was nothing to her, and stared blankly at the ceiling. My gallery, consisting of regular attendees of the courtroom, some reporters attracted by the name Whitmore, and Maria Chen herself, sitting in the 3rd row, gasped collectively. Then the silence was broken by me reviewing the case file while Alexandra remained perfectly still. It didn't take me long to catch her looking for her phone inside the bag. I politely asked her to put it away, and it gave the woman a start. She looked as if she had just seen a ghost. However, after the shock passed, Alexandra sighed with all the grace in the world and looked at me, the defense attorney's next fatal mistake was to say that his client had an important commitment later on that day. Another commitment was she suggesting that a court hearing is less important than her other business. I assured him and Alexandra that she would be here with us until we finished this hearing, regardless of her further commitments, except in case of a real medical emergency. That is when Alexandra decided to give us her opinion on the matter. She leaned forward and, with an obvious tone of someone who is trying to enlighten everybody around her, that this whole thing is kind of silly. It was just a minor accident with both drivers having full insurance coverage to pay for the damage. Yes, indeed, the damage was minimal, according to her. According to her, Maria Chen's minivan was totaled due to the collision with Alexandra's car. Her 2 children, Emma and Michael, screamed in fear. She hit her head on the steering wheel, causing a small cut on her head that started bleeding. To her, it was a minor issue. The attorney at this point seemed to be wishing he could sink right into the floor. I requested Alexandra to clarify her statements regarding the incident. It seems like she did not get it. She hit a car on a red light, caused damage, and instead of following the law and stopping for exchanging contacts with the victims, left the scene of the accident. Was it ridiculous? Alexandra stood her ground. Of course, accidents do happen, Your Honor. This is why we call them accidents. Everybody acted as if something terrible happened. I could feel the tension building up in the courtroom. I asked the court clerk to play the footage of the accident. We watched in utter silence as a video showed Alexandra's BMW sitting at the red light and then crashing into Maria's minivan, pushing it forward into the intersection. It was Maria getting out of the car and visibly shaken, looking at the kids who were strapped in the back seat. Then Alexandra emerges from her car, surveys the damage, and looks at the lady whose head is bleeding. Then she is heard saying on the video, whatever, it's a piece of junk anyway. And then she walks back to her BMW, drives around the minivan, and runs a red light. There was silence in the courtroom when the footage stopped playing. I looked at Alexandra and did not even bother asking her whether she recognizes herself on video. Her face was completely emotionless, and she obviously did not feel anything watching herself on a large screen in front of everyone. I asked her to recall what she had actually said to Miss Chen at the scene. Alexandra admitted that she couldn't remember what had happened exactly, but said she had been under a lot of stress that morning. I reminded her that she had been shown to call the vehicle belonging to Maria a piece of junk. Alexandra tried to defend herself, saying that it was a figure of speech, meaning that her car was obviously nicer. Therefore, the damage caused would be easier to fix. Being nice to your car, I pointed out, has made the damage less serious. Yes, she said confidently, and that was all I needed to hear to finally rise from my bench. Over 40 years of being in the judge's office have taught me that there are gestures you can use to gain respect. In a courtroom, rising from the bench is definitely one of them. I asked Alexandra to carefully consider what she had just told me, that she was standing in my courtroom watching a footage of her leaving a scene of an accident and mocking the lady who got involved. Did I get it right? Alexandra's facade started crumbling down. She admitted that her statement had been misunderstood, that she hadn't intended to be harsh when speaking to Maria. I asked her what she meant exactly. She explained that her car was nicer and therefore the damage to Maria's car would be less expensive to repair. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Therefore, I began slowly. You considered the damage less severe because your car was nicer. More or less, yes, she replied. The defense attorney immediately got up asking for a minute with his client. I told him to take a seat since I needed answers to some additional questions. Firstly, I needed to know what happened. Immediately following the accident, Alexandra admitted that she had been late for an appointment that day and had been confused about the brake and accelerator pedals which resulted in the accident. Children, she added, crying is just their way of doing things. Maria Chen in the third row gasped quietly. Looking at her, I saw a woman holding a tissue to her mouth. The eyes of hers were filled with pain and rage. I asked Alexandra to describe how she felt when leaving the scene of an accident. She stated that she had not paid any particular attention to the children because they looked all right at the moment. Kids, she clarified, cry over everything. You're scaring the kids with your reaction to my case. There wasn't any peace in the courtroom after that. The gallery was filled with people who were standing. The bailiff called for order. I noticed a look on the face of Alexandra's attorney that suggested he too might be reconsidering his career choice. I waited for the crowd to settle and then spoke in the sudden silence that followed. You're blaming a mother for her children's fear after you drove your vehicle into theirs and then abandoned the scene of the accident. I said yes, she insisted, because kids learn their emotions from their parents. If it weren't for Maria reacting in such a way, it wouldn't be a big deal. I've seen enough confessions and denials and explanations and excuses in my time sitting on this bench. In the 4 decades I've spent here, I don't believe I've ever come across someone so self-centered and so lacking in empathy that they were unable to see the reality of their situation. You weren't acting cruel for the sake of acting cruel. You were something more dangerous than that. Someone who never saw another person's pain as anything other than an inconvenience. I checked your driving record. It provided a very enlightening insight. Not just 3 speeding violations in 2 years, not just the citation for running a red light, not just the past citation for reckless driving that was negotiated out for her family. There was a pattern here. It wasn't a pattern of mistakes. It was a pattern of someone who felt the law did not apply to them and only applied to other people. Sure, you interrupted me. Everybody speeds, and you were right. Not everybody takes off when they cause an accident. I didn't run away, you clarified. I left the scene. Your distinction was duly noted. Then she did it, the thing that showed me all I needed to know. She looked at her attorney with an innocence in her eyes as she expressed her surprise that this wasn't getting thrown out of court on a technicality. This was the source of her arrogance. Some point in her past when she believed that rules applied differently to her, someone had shown her how much she could get away with when you had a name like Whitmore. This isn't a challenge to a system. You believe in the system. This is confusion that the system applies to you at all. Your father's lawyer is not sitting in my court today, I explained. I am, and I will decide what happens next. She looked at me, and I recognized the look on her face. She had the realization on her face that the map in her head no longer matches the territory in front of her. All the ways she imagined her money, her name, the contributions of her family protected her. I told her very frankly that none of those mattered in this courtroom. She was here as a defendant charged with breaking the law. I watched her cry, but I must be specific about those tears. Over the years, I've learned how to read them. Those weren't tears of regret or remorse. These were the tears of someone who has just discovered that consequences extend to her as well. These were the tears of someone who just discovered what it feels like to experience the consequences of your actions. You will be paying for the mistake that you have made. Your Honor, the defense attorney interrupted me. This sentence is too harsh. My client has no prior record. He couldn't have possibly been so naive as to believe this. The record of a pattern of reckless driving, a lack of remorse throughout the process, and repeatedly blaming the victim. These add up to a lot more. Alexandra was sobbing, and the tears streaked down her face. I want to make clear what is important here. Emma and Michael, 7-year-old and 9-year-old, are what's really important. You had the chance to do the right thing and save them a nightmare. You failed, she turned to her father in the gallery, James Whitmore. Daddy, please do something, she cried. James Whitmore stood very slowly, and the whole courtroom waited for him to speak. Alexandra, he said very quietly, you did this to yourself. With that, he returned to his seat. His wife had remained perfectly still throughout the whole process. He was followed out of the bench by 2 guards who were led her away. Her heel click-clacked against the floor just as it had before, but now it had a completely new meaning. I turned to Maria and asked if she wanted to speak. She stood, and her dignified posture filled the courtroom. I don't enjoy seeing people punished, she began very quietly. But her voice resonated in the courtroom. But my daughter recently asked me if, because she is wealthy, if she gets to bend rules. Emma is only 7 years old, but she understands that certain people matter more than others in this world, and I didn't know how to respond to her. Now I will tell her that everyone matters equally, and there are still people who believe in justice and fairness and the law. The courtroom applauded, and I allowed them to. James Whitmore approached me afterwards, looking like he aged several years in one morning. I'm not here to apologize for my daughter's actions, he began, and then faltered. I can't control what she does. I understand that, but I want to apologize for raising her like this, for teaching her the world doesn't function the same way for her. My wife and I gave Alexandra everything we could, including the tools necessary to use that privilege wisely. I interrupted politely. We thought we were doing the same thing. I stand in this courtroom with the checkbook because I want you to accept our contribution towards the costs of raising Maria's children. Not because I think this will change the sentence. It won't, just to make the gesture, because we should have taught that to our daughter a long time ago. Maria, James turned to her. I'm truly sorry, he continued, looking at Maria, for the trouble we've caused. I hope it wasn't too much. You may not realize this. Maria looked at him. But those words mean a great deal to us, more than you think. I saw the interaction between them with the special attention that comes with important events. The man realized at last what happens when you raise your kid without teaching them to deal with the world. You create someone who is unprepared to handle anything, someone who enters adult life devoid of skills and ready to be crushed. Somewhere during those 200 hours of community service, Alexandra realized something too. She approached the administration of the hospital to offer her services to continue volunteering. This was not a mandatory request from her since she had fulfilled all obligations, but a voluntary one. She wrote an apology letter to Emma and Michael, admitting to them how guilty she was for what she had done and offering full responsibility for her actions without any excuse or any compensation from her part. She gave the letter to her children when she thought they were ready to read it. 6 months later, Alexandra visited my courtroom as a free woman. However, this time she was not there as a defendant, but as a person seeking to talk to me. As she stood before me in the same spot she had previously stood in silky and designer sunglasses, she admitted to hating me that day. She was sentenced. I was mean, I was vengeful. It was about me, not her. But she had changed her mind and was now thankful to me.